Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand, and I'm here with Karl Forehand. And today we are doing something a little bit different with the podcast. Do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, right now we're preparing to go to the Wild Goose conference. Mm-hmm. So, or I think it's called a conference, but so we're practicing. So we're going to practice the speech. And then if you're at the Goose, you'll hear this. If not, you can listen to this afterward because I don't know if they're recording it. So here we go. Is organized religion viable for the 21st century? Hi, I'm Karl Forehand.
And I'm Laura Forehand, and we are from Northwest Missouri. We have 3 grown adult children and 3 grandchildren.
So speaking of grandchildren, when we were going to have our first grandchild, I told you, I'm so excited to be called Grandpa. And you said something along the lines of not so fast. We've already chosen a name for you. And I was like, what do you mean? But there's this grandpa and grandma names that people have now, right? We know people that are called Chief and Nana, and one guy is called Doodah. And so we are Mimi and Papa.
Yep.
And I told you there's nothing good can come from this. And it was true. And our second granddaughter the other day called me Peepaw. So there you go.
I thought it was cute. And Mimi doesn't bother me. I'm just thrilled to have grandchildren. So they can pretty much call me anything they choose.
Yeah. So our son a while back went to Taiwan 6 or 7 years ago after he graduated from the University of Missouri. And so he's not around. I have one wife, 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters. And I used to say I'm paddling my man boat through the estrogen sea. I literally never get my way. So I'm Papa or Peepaw if you choose.
Yep, that's right.
I probably shouldn't tell you this, but we picked up a hitchhiker along the way. And the person got in the car and said, I'm appreciative that you picked me up, but didn't you worry that I'm a serial killer or something? And I just kind of looked at him and said, well, what's the chance of 2 serial killers in one car? And so he didn't say anything after that.
Yeah, well, let's move past the dad jokes. So let's talk about that you had a stroke 18 months ago.
Yeah, and I don't recommend it. But we've been working through that. Last year, we released a novel, and we also released our book together called Out in the Desert, which we're going to talk about today. Writing has been a therapy for me. It's helped me be introspective about all of this and process a lot of it. So we're really proud of the book.
Yeah. And I'm currently a 3rd grade teacher who uses a teaching method called whole brain teaching. Karl's favorite part is when I say, you're still cool. Mm-hmm. So we use that in our classroom. So when we flub up over the next 50 minutes, which we're going to, you can just tell us you're still cool.
Yeah. And if you see me, and I guarantee you this weekend, I'm going to drop something or knock something over, spill something, things like that. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't want you to pick it up for me. You can just walk by and kind of whisper to me, you're still cool. And it works for lots of different situations. So I invite you to try it at the Wild Goose.
Yeah.
To try that. Just when you see somebody make a mistake, just say, you're still cool. it's the greatest thing to me. Anyway, Out in the Desert was written in 1920, a long time ago, in 2020 during the pandemic. So at first we didn't release it. We didn't, go and try to get it published. And we just let people have it on a PDF for free. As we were recovering from the stroke and going to rehab in Kansas City, there was some driving, so we would read it to each other, and we decided then that we really wanted to release it to the public and have it available in a book. So we did that, and now we're sharing it with you. 7 years ago is when we started our deconstruction. I was a pastor for about 20 years. I kind of specialized in going into small towns and reviving or planting small churches and getting them back on track. And then I would get bored with that and move on to another one, and that's kind of what we did.
Yeah. And I would say probably 7 years ago, maybe if not a little more than that, a little longer than that, I would say I was the first one to maybe start asking questions. So I always like to tell people that I started emotionally disconnecting from the church. Although I had questions, I really didn't feel safe to ask them out loud because I felt not, because of you, but I felt that I couldn't jeopardize your ministry or even our family's finances, which is true for a lot of pastors that may be questioning. That's their financial security.
Yeah, and so we looked at a lot of views like hell and penal substitutionary atonement, how we felt about the queer community, or racism. We began to investigate all of those things. And I realized I had a deep history of nationalism and many things like that we started to work on.
Yeah. And, once you deconstruct, people assume that you're reconstructing, but we don't really consider ourselves as reconstructing. It's more of an evolutionary process for us.
Yeah. I know people probably that talk about an unvarnished Jesus, or removing the varnish from a painting, restoring a painting, remodeling a home. There's lots of ways to look at that. But we like to look at it as evolution of ourselves into a more authentic human being.
Right.
That's the way we like to describe it.
Yeah, and our goal is not to create a new creed or belief system. And in fact, we're not here to tell you to leave your church. Instead, we are in a process of being and becoming what we have always been.
I don't know how you feel about Rob Bell, but Rob Bell has a podcast episode that's called Like a Fish Standing on the Beach. And the part I love about that is he talks about the water we swim in, our conditioning. And for the fish, that's it. It's the water he's been swimming in. He didn't have a good perspective when he stood up on the beach, however he does that. That gives him perspective. And that's what we want to invite you to do as we go through this explanation of the first half of our book. And we want you to be able to read the book and evaluate the situation you're in, to take a good, hard look at whether organized religion is viable in the 21st century.
Yeah, so let's dig into the book, Out into the Desert. So the first thing we talked about in the book was the main thing. And Karl used to say, keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah, and back then when I talked about the main thing, I meant evangelism. There's not really anything wrong with evangelism. Evangelism is, I've got something I want to tell you about it. It's good news, right? I have some good news I want to tell you about. Nothing wrong with that. I used to do that with karate and skydiving and everything I tried. And now I talk about my books all the time. Yeah. But in a church, the staff and volunteers are postured towards the front door. And sometimes they're looking towards the front door and people are hobbling out the back door. And when you take a step back, when you're not heavily involved in it, you literally notice that. You notice the posture of the staff, the way they're looking at the new people that are coming in. Their focus is putting more butts in the seats. We count nickels and noses. We sometimes say the holy trinity of potties, preschools, keeping the trains running. We're we're focused on that. We keep it simple and repeatable, rinse and repeat. That's how you build a mega church. Keep doing that over and over and you'll make it.
Yeah. And for you, the main thing was love. I remember, and grace. That was what I really remember about your preaching style. But for me, the main thing is authenticity. So in church, are we able to be the truest version of ourselves was always my question. And for me, that answer was no.
Yeah.
So then we talk about, are we addicted to church?
Yeah. And that's a funny thing to talk about. And probably some of us have never considered that before. But take the example of Hillsong. I know Hillsong's in trouble right now, but they've already reproduced all over the world. Scientifically, they designed a method to alter your mood. And all across, look at the mega churches in California right now, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars bringing in musicians and professional musicians, buying several $100,000 sound systems to alter our mood. People say, I like going to church. I say, of course you do, because it's designed to make you like it. But listen, people, don't confuse dopamine with the Spirit. You can sometimes get that same feeling at a concert, a good movie, our Spotify playlist. The number one thing probably that people told me after sermons was, thanks for the fix.
Yeah. Or thanks for stepping on my toes.
Right. That was the other one.
Yeah. So it was hard for me to admit that I was addicted to church, but the brain chemistry doesn't lie. I definitely had those ebbs and flows of dopamine hits, and then I would come down off of it. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something to be said about being addicted to church. So then we talked about in chapter 3, the services of the church.
Yeah. So I made a grave mistake once in church. I just decided to shake things up and I moved the chairs around. And people came in like, do we need to set the chairs up? What are we doing? And they were really nervous. And then we kind of stood up through most of the worship service. And I might have let them grab their chair and sit wherever they wanted for the sermon. And one lady sat backwards. That was her freedom, I guess. But after the service, they're like, we're going to put these back, right? We're going back to normal, right? So, but the sermon is one part of the church or the services of the church. People come to hear the sermon and they want to hear it over and over and over again. My best understanding of that is that's just using part of our brain.
Well, just one part of your brain.
Yeah, it's not the best way to learn. It's a good way to indoctrinate people if you keep speaking at them over and over again. But they lecture repeatedly, don't allow questions. And in church, a lot of times we claim authority from the stage. It's certainly elevated in that way. And there's that authority mindset. And it says to the congregants, I'm your ordained source of wisdom.
Yeah.
And I know that some pastors are softer about that. Some are real strong about that. But all of the things that we've designed since Constantine are geared that way to just present the sermon and you're to listen.
Yeah, and that's why I use whole brain teaching in my classroom. So the premise of that is that you're using lots of different areas of your brain because that's the best way to learn. And lectures only tap into Broca's area, which is the part of your brain that understands speech. And so we might think that that's okay, but actually we're assuming that when we're lecturing that Broca's area is actually understanding what the pastor is speaking from stage. So when we don't understand, there's no room for us to ask questions, which just leads to, either just a lot of misunderstanding or, we just never know because we're not going to ask those questions.
And I think I say in the book that if I want to get the best sermon in the world, I can go to the internet. My pastor may or may not be the best, but I'm sure I'm fond for him or her, but may be able to get that somewhere else. Music embeds really deeply for me. It irritates you because
it used to mean a lot to me, but it not so much.
Yeah. And it irritates you because I would be singing a song that I heard 3 days ago. Mm-hmm. It kind of gets inside of me. I love the music. I loved all different kinds of music when I was a pastor. I really didn't even mind the hymns too much as long as we sang them right, or reworked them a little bit. But, here's the weird thing. My daughter took me to a Kebmo and Melissa Etheridge concert the other day, and I had the same feeling. I got the same emotions watching that concert. I even scared Kebmo because I stood up right in the middle of one of his guitar solos or something, and no one else stood up, and so he looked right at me like I was going to shoot him or something. But music affects me deeply, and it's emotional for me. But also, there's this idea of the assembly. In Hebrews 10 talks about, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. So let's just think about that for a little bit. If we had a Facebook group one time that was 1,500 members, and in that 1,500, so let's make that into a church. If we have a 1,500 member church, that means 1,500 people get up, usually on Sunday morning or Friday night, Saturday night or whatever, and get ready for church. If they're like us, they get in a fight in the driveway, right? There's the old joke about, you get the kids ready and I'll go honk the horn, and a lot of times it's like that. But then we drive somewhere. We face our past trauma. We realize that it's sometimes invoking trauma for us. We sit down, we have some coffee in the coffee shop. We talk to the same 10 people. After it's over, we get back. So we hear a sermon, we hear a concert. We get back in the car, drive home, a little bit high from the experience, but exhausted. And then that begins to fade, and we start pre-using for next week. And I just wonder, as I go through that, as we went through that for about 2 years after deconstructing, after stepping down from our church, is this what we should be doing in the 21st century?
Yeah, and this is how our family was every Sunday when we were in the ministry and getting ready for church. We would rush around getting 3 kids ready. Typically it was me because, you were sitting in your chair focused on your sermon, and we were all grouchy. But as soon as we opened the doors to the church, we put our masks on and presented ourselves as shiny, happy people. And going back to facing past traumas, I think we learn in organized religion a lot of times that we are worthless and we are worms and we are dirty, rotten sinners. And then we go listen to a sermon that solidifies that for us, which can be re-traumatizing, like you said.
Now, the interesting thing about being a pastor was many times people told me their best experiences came in nature. And I'm like, well, what about us? I was worried about how we were affecting them. But there's this longing to have stillness, to connect with nature. We may be addicted to church, but we're longing to reconnect to the earth.
Yeah, and this is really true for me. When I reconnected with nature through my deconstruction, I began to find my authentic self again, which was huge.
Yeah. And so a lot of times people say, what about small groups? And I think I agree. There's some value to small groups. Really, to find healing, we need to be able to tell our story. We need somebody to hear it and believe it. And when they do, then we make some progress. So there is some value. But why not just do that? If that's what really works, that's what really changes us, those small groups. And let's do that without entangling it up in an organization.
Yeah, and if we choose to use a small group model, we need to be ready to listen intentionally without judgment and the need to fix anyone. And sometimes that's really difficult inside of a church because we have our creeds and our beliefs. And so we, feel the need to fix people to match those creeds and beliefs.
Mm-hmm. I wrote recently, instead of listening to sermons, maybe we should have been listening to others. And I think that's really at the heart of a lot of what we're saying. In the 21st century, can you get these services of the church somewhere else? And I'm asking you to ask that question honestly, without becoming defensive about how you do things. But couldn't we get those services somewhere else? I could find a better sermon. I could hear a concert. I could get information a lot easier somewhere else without dressing up and going to church. And I think that's an honest question we need to ask ourselves. Mm-hmm. If in the age we live in, we weren't born in AD 0 or AD 100, mm-hmm. we're in the 21st century. And in the 21st century, what makes the most sense?
Yeah. So moving on to chapter 4, the cost of doing business. And just so we are clear, I believe, I'm speaking this from my heart, that church is an organization and business. So what are the costs of doing business?
Yeah, so the numbers say it's really like $800 to $1,400, but we always round it, say $1,000 a year that people give to their churches. When they're regular attenders, when they come all the time, they give about $1,000 a year to their church. So our 1,500 member church that we talked about would have a $1.5 million budget. If you're just 150 people, then you have a $150,000 budget. It works out real well to multiply that stuff. But of that money, 70% of it goes to salaries for staff and pastors and the building. So the salaries in the building take up 70, some people say 75% of the total budget. So in the small part of that is the ministry, what we always talk about. We're helping the poor, but we're doing only 5%, 5 to 10% is actually going to help those kinds of ministries outside the church. And some churches, you have to send to a cooperative program, you send money to those kind of things and mission projects and so on. But 70% is salaries and buildings. And my question is, and this is the question I ask, you don't have to ask the same questions, but do I really need a clergy to tell me what to think, how to live, and what to be afraid of?
And where to send your money.
And where to send your money. Claire, I know there's clergy here, but let's be honest, pastors. We need to realize that sometimes we have less real life experience than the people we're preaching to, the people we're telling how to live their lives. Usually what pastors and preachers have is a good speaking ability. Their appearance is kind of non-offensive. And the example of that is Karl Lentz. Karl Lentz of Hillsong on the East Coast wasn't necessarily wise. He may be now, but he was attractive. He drew people in, and that's why he was up there. That was the main reason he was up there.
Yeah, and it always made me uncomfortable when we would plant a new church. People desperately wanted to put Karl on a pedestal, and I would always envision the day when they would knock that pedestal out from under his feet, and it would all come tumbling down. And this indeed happened at all 3 of our churches.
Mm-hmm. So do I really need the building, the budget, the organization, a celebrity pastor? Do I really need all of those things for my spirituality? And I would just ask you to ask the question honestly. Think about it for a while. Don't answer right now. But my proposal is this. People kind of get fed up with me, and then they say, well, what would you do? And here's what I say. Here's a good start. Take that $1.5 million budget and cut it in half. You may have to lay off a few staff or pastors. When you do that, keep the ones you have mostly for resources, to provide resources to help people, to help them in their journey. Tape the sermons, those kind of things. But give that other $750,000 directly to mental health issues, start with the pastoral staff, start with the staff of the church, and move on down and begin to provide mental health counseling for everybody that's been involved in organized religion. You can give directly to the groups you want to give to. Volunteer directly with them. We don't, in this day and age, need that much supervision. We can get the information. We can research the groups. We can do the legwork ourselves.
Use our own critical thinking skills.
That's right. Meet several friends and listen to them. That's it. Meet at a coffee shop and listen during those hours you would have been, dressing up to go to church. And literally that's what we've done. Yeah. Our last trip when we went to Texas, we met with 4 or 5 people along the way that we'd met online. And we just had coffee and we had dinner. It was wonderful. Or we can take that $750,000, put it back into the church budget and spend most of it on a talented speaker, a big building, production of the show and other building expenses, or let's get creative. We're not going to get it done by doing almost exactly what we did before.
Right. So we've talked about these first 4 chapters. So chapter 5 is saying that we can do better.
We can do better. I'll just say it as simply as I can. Defending of the ways of the past are what lead to MAGA and all the other problems we have in church. All the while, our culture is moving toward a more contemplative model. Karl Forehand said, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or nothing at all. The trouble was, throughout history, the church doesn't like its mystics until they're dead or until long after they're dead. But understand, the last church we were at understood the contemplative, but most of their money, like we've mentioned before, was invested in the show, the Sunday morning show. Somehow we need to get back to nature and our inner knowing.
Yeah, and our Desert Sanctuary Facebook group and podcast guests have definitely taught us the secret of doing better, and that is going inside and trusting ourselves. And so, chapter 6, we discussed, would Jesus go to church?
Yeah, and so that was prompted by, after we stopped going to church, the very first weeks were, okay, what do we do now? And so we just sit on the porch. So we went to brunch in a town nearby across Nebraska. And so while we were there, this older guy, he looked like Santa Claus. He's in regular clothes, but he looked like Santa Claus. And he came into the diner and he would stop by a booth and kind of sit down with them and talk. And then he'd go to another booth and talk with them. He seemed friendly and he was laughing with people and so on. And for me, that was just a picture of if Jesus would go to church or if Jesus was here on a Sunday morning, that's where he would be. And you thought differently, right?
So I kind of changed my mind before we actually published it, but I believe wholeheartedly that Jesus would be wherever people are hurting. That's where he would be. I don't believe he would be standing on the stage in a building. Rather, I see him in the pews or on a park bench or in the fetal position on the bedroom floor. Mm-hmm. Wherever people are hurting, I believe that's where he is.
Yeah, so he wouldn't be waving an assault rifle with the American flag in the background, revving up a crowd at a local church.
Right. So this chapter 7, was probably one of the hardest ones for me to write because we talk about the things that hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the first one was, I remember just standing in our living room with my phone and texting repeatedly, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. It's not what I said. Mm-hmm. Someone was convinced when I asked her if she was okay because she's moving a little slow, she just came unglued on me. And I kept saying, I didn't say you were fat. I don't know how she got that. And I looked back over my texts over and over again. And I realized pretty quickly that she was calling other people. This was a mutiny. And I couldn't figure out what I did wrong. She wouldn't accept my calls. And things like that hurt as a pastor and wife. And things like that happen in the church all the time.
Right.
There's power struggles. And with any organization, that happens.
Right. One example, well, there's actually a couple of examples that were quite painful for me, but the first one was at our first church. And like Karl said, we pastored small town churches. So the first one was in a town of 250 people. And, so they like you to know your community. So they were having this big street dance, and people in the church, basically the powers that be in the church, were encouraged us to go. And so, of course, we went and, just got to meet some people. And but then this slow song came on, and you and I decided to go out there and dance with the rest of the community and have a slow dance together. And that was not wise. I didn't know that because we had been invited to the street dance. So I thought it might be okay that we danced there together. But after that, I'm not really sure. I think they called you for a meeting or something like that.
It's like it was a family within the church. Then their brother, who was the spokesman, they decided they didn't approve of that, and they were going to let us know.
Yeah.
And like you say, sometimes the small group of people can be very loud.
Yes. So that was I would say my first bout of incredible shame within the church, because I couldn't quite understand what I had done wrong by, dancing with my husband at a street dance we were encouraged to go to.
Yeah.
But then at our third church, there was a street ministry that they wanted to collaborate with our church in beginning there in the town that we were pastoring.
And it was almost ready to go.
It was almost ready to go, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but this was about the same time that our oldest daughter turned 21. And so she had asked me if, hey, Mom, do you want to go with me to a winery? And, I want to have my first sip of alcohol, with you on my 21st birthday. So, we're going to a classy place. She's of legal drinking age, so I'm like, sure, let's go. I really felt honored. As you know, as your kids grow up, they sometimes don't want a lot to do with you because they're trying to find their own way. And she actually wanted to have this moment with me, and I was very honored. So we went, and we had, this much wine. There was so little wine in the glass, but she took a picture of it and put it on her social media. And I'm really not quite sure. Maybe she tagged me in it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how this other organization got a hold of that picture, but that was kind of the beginning of the end of that ministry.
Yeah, all of a sudden, my meeting with the guy, three more people showed up at the meeting, which that usually means something's wrong and you're in trouble. And even though, it was subtle, and it was shaming. It was a lot of those things. They still liked us as a pastor, but they, because it was part of an organization, they had to address it, and things and just made you feel all yucky. It makes you feel all kind of shamed
as
inside.
if you're doing something wrong, but there's nothing wrong with dancing with your spouse or loved ones at a street dance, and there's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine if you're both of age. Or
yoga and meditation, which is what I got in trouble for.
Yeah.
And so that was another case where a different female was rallying the troops against us because we do yoga and meditation and trying to prove with no evidence what was wrong with yoga, And so the problem with all those things, I know group dynamics are the same no matter where you're at, but we've linked our spirituality with an organization. And the trouble with organizations is the organization always comes first.
Right.
And organizations rarely, if ever, change course. You can't even change the color of the carpet. You can't, move the chairs around like I tried to do. Every church has a mission statement. It believes it's right. It believes God is on its side, and it believes it's doing the right things.
Right.
And so you get in big trouble when you mess with that, and when we tie our spirituality to an organization. Right.
And honestly, even still talking about some of this stuff, I can feel kind of the sadness that we experienced during those times of hurt. So chapter 8, how religion ruins sex. So I'm going to let you start this one off.
Yeah, I would say, number one, read the book, because we talk about it at length there, but we still have issues. We're 58, I think.
Yep.
And we still have issues. There's still things that come up from what we experience in church around the area of sex. And listen, people like Ron DeSantis, I don't want to hear what they have to say about my sexuality or other people's sexuality, because, basically just because there's a lot of sand around him doesn't mean he has to bury his head in it. And most Christians shouldn't either. The issues with purity culture, shiny, happy baby makers, pedophiles, abusers, and all that happens inside the church. It's so overwhelming what you experience inside a church sometimes around the area of sex. Is traumatizing for a lot of people. And people tell us that story over and over and over again on the Desert Sanctuary.
Yeah. And we bought into the purity culture while we were in church. It was all based on fear. And we even gave our girls purity rings. Notice we didn't say we gave our son anything. Apparently, boys were excluded from any kind of purity talk. But we gave our girls purity rings. I'm really happy to say today that they never wore them. They probably threw them away right away. But however, the underlying message was still there. And even in their own marriages, they've had to have some hard conversations around intimacy with their spouses in order to undo some of the damage of that purity culture indoctrination. Yeah. So let's talk about chapter 9, which is women and queer people in the church.
Yeah, and we didn't actually talk about queer people in the book, but especially women. I want to say as clearly as I can that I'm excited, not just happy, but excited about that we're moving towards inclusiveness for both groups, for women and queer people, that we're moving towards that. Our podcast is moving towards that. The Goose, I assume, is moving towards that. Every part of society is getting on board, and I want to celebrate that. But I also want to challenge you if you're in one of those groups. Maybe you're a female pastor, maybe you're gay. I want to challenge you to help us move away from organized religion and the patterns of the past that enslaved and traumatized us. I want to encourage you to help us go towards trauma-informed practices wherever they're at. By this, I mean everything: schools, communities, and churches. If we feel a need, we have to keep churches for the 21st century, then at least I hope they're trauma-informed. I hope they're inclusive and all of those things. To settle for just more inclusive organizations based on past models may hurt us. Remember, the organization always comes first.
Yeah. And, I really want to be an ally to women in the LGBTQIA plus community. But as I told Karl, don't expect me to do it inside a church or a religious organization.
You're very strong about that.
I'm very strong about that.
I don't even get the word. It's kind of like with our grandchildren, when their parents ask you, can you come babysit? They don't finish the sentence. Well, if I start to say something about we could visit we don't even get the whole word out.
You just have to use the sound. And I'm like, no,
I don't think so.
So finally, chapter 10, and there's more chapters in the book than that, but we're just going to stop at chapter 10. We talk about power and control.
Yeah. Early Christianity was not under control. It was out of control. Because of fear, it causes us to allow ourselves to be herded, basically. And that kind of came to fruition with Constantine, several hundred years later. But fear causes us to allow ourselves to be herded. We develop certainty about our doctrines. We become indoctrinated. Grooming happens. I know the conversation that's out there. Grooming happens in the church. That's where it happens. They keep us busy, not allowed to ask questions. Creeds and belief statements stop us from growing and start us defending all of these different doctrines. Yeah,
and it's probably one of the most despised statements that I hear a lot when we're sharing our story with people that maybe still are inside the organization is, I'm sorry you had that experience, but that doesn't happen in our church. And I want to respond, are you sure about that? So a lot of times we say things like, well, our church is better than the IFB or the IBLC or the SBC, which truly is not saying much if we're using that as a yardstick. So keeping you stuck where you are because we are unwilling to see hurts and traumatizes inside the walls of the church.
Yeah. So we're not here to talk you out of church. We just want you to do the evaluation, to take a step back, maybe be the fish standing on the beach that says, what's the water I was swimming in? What's my conditioning? Why do I think that? And do the evaluation. Our book will help with that. There's also the second half of the book, which is about thriving outside of organized religion. So we thank you for having us here. We'll be doing a book signing at noon. Our new book called Leaning Forward is available for pre-order on Kindle. And we're also talking about this weekend doing a special deal. If you order from us, Venmo us, we can get you the Leaning Forward book signed with a workbook, PDF, and so on. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, and we are so grateful that you stopped by our presentation today. Please know that even if we don't know you personally, we do love you and we are thankful for you and we see you.
I want to end like I do every time when I close the Desert Sanctuary to encourage you to be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.